All right. Thank you, Julie, and thanks everybody for joining. It's been a while since we last had a chance to gather amongst urban practitioners and USWG members to discuss updates on urban humanitarian practice and application of the Salmon's approach. So we're really happy to have this occasion to share some updates amongst agencies and hopefully revive a bit the learning and advocacy agenda around urban humanitarian action and operationalization of the Salmon's approach. So for those of you who are familiar with this group, and this topic, we used to have regular webinars where we invited practitioners to share their experiences in innovating on humanitarian projects in urban areas and in applications of the Salmon's approach over the last few years. And the types of meetings we had were very much webinar style. And this time we wanted to have a bit of a closer group of people somewhere in between a meeting and a webinar to allow for more discussion and to help us shape the next steps of the collective advocacy in a context where the topic of area-based approaches, interventions in urban areas, and the Salmon's approach are sort of regaining traction in the sector. So it's really an important moment for us to reflect on the best practices and the challenges and sort of encourage our donors and partners to take it seriously. So in terms of the agenda, quite simply, we are going to have a time where interaction will reflect on some of the conclusions that they were able to draw with Shelter and Salmon's partners in a conference they organized in January in DC. And a lot of the key actions and recommendations that stem from these discussions amongst peers are actually super relevant for practitioners of the USWG. And then we're going to move on with partners, updates, with a short presentation of impact initiatives who recently worked on a guidance document to integrate environmental considerations in applications of the Salmon's approach. Then we're going to have Laura from IOM and Sandra from IFRC share some updates from recent projects and initiatives. And hopefully Alexandra from SDC will join us in the second half of this meeting to share her perspective from a donor on why it is important to intervene in urban areas and what types of interventions they would be supportive of in applications of the Nexus, but also on greening urban humanitarian interventions. And then, and that's going to be a nice segue to the discussion, Eva from CRS will announce a call for research and case studies that will hopefully fuel a larger and more collective exercise on advocacy for the Salmon's approach in urban areas. I hope I didn't forget anyone in this agenda. Just a small reminder and background about this working group, which has been created by the Global Shelter Cluster in 2017 to promote the application of Salmon-based approaches in urban areas, but also document practice and make sure that there is a space available for practitioners to share experience. So obviously one of the key achievements has been the development of the Salmon's Approach Guidance Note, which is a foundational document, very conceptual, about how to implement this approach following core principles, which are targeting specific areas of high needs, which often are urban areas, finding ways to deliver assistance multi-sectorally in that area, either from a single project or in collaboration with other agencies that have capacities in sectors that a single agency may not be able to provide, working collaboratively with all local stakeholders, and considering the whole population. So that these are very much the four guiding principles that we as a group of practitioners try to apply in the field, in the scope of our projects, and that we also are interested in hearing feedback about how easy it is to implement these 4 principles and what are common challenges and how to overcome them. So that was my general introduction. Without further ado, I'll pass it on to Interaction, who will provide some high-level reflections on concretely what are the priorities as discussed by practitioners recently. Over to you.
Hi, thanks, Lou, and thanks everybody for joining us. Really appreciate your time. As Lou mentioned, the guidance was published a while ago, 2020, and then we had the online training developed out there. But what we see across the landscape is many of the high-level document from IASC and many other humanitarian documents keep referring to settlements approach, area-based approach, at least the principles as the changes needed in the system. I won't go into detail, but at least 6 or 7 of the high-level documents, policies mention this. However, we do see, we do see some changes in the way people are implementing, which is, interesting and welcome. There are donors thinking about funding, multi-sectoral coalitions and other things. There are examples. However, we do not have a clear policy at the high levels. So what we are trying to see to understand first through practitioners what is happening in the field, what are the barriers, lessons, and then case studies as well, and then see how do we advocate for more accountability to communities, local stakeholders, as well as the environment we work in. So we are looking for your help in coming up with these ideas and suggestions, which we will go later. But I will stop there and pass it on to Julie.
Thanks, Hilmi. And apologies for not having my camera on. I'm having some technical difficulties this morning. As Lou mentioned, Interaction had a global shelter and settlements roundtable in January where we invited about 25 shelter practitioners to join us and discuss the future of the shelter and settlement sector. The goal and objective was to kind of come up with some recommended action items that agencies within the sector could participate in to help move the sector forward. So one of the topics during this discussion was operationalizing the settlements approach. So on the slide, you can see the kind of 5 action items that were agreed upon. 1, to develop a strategy to convey the benefits of the approach. 2, to raise awareness and train senior management on the approach. 3, to advocate for the application of the approach in the humanitarian agenda. So kind of what Hilmi was just talking about. 4, to share contemporary applications of the approach through new case studies. As you might know, the original guidance note included a compendium of case studies, but both Interaction and CRS are soliciting some new applications of the approach. And 5th, to improve cross-sectoral learning and understanding of the approach. I think despite the fact that this working group is under the Global Shelter Cluster, and this working group is the one that published this guidance, the settlements approach, one of the key principles is multi-sectoral work. So we do really want other sectors to know about this approach and how to implement it. So these action items and participating in them are open to any agencies, groups, individuals that are interested in participating. These will be loose coalitions of organizations that have the capacity and willingness to move these action items forward. If you are interested in participating in these settlements approach activities, please send me an email and we will loop you in with the rest of the agencies that are going to be working on these. And I just dropped my email in the chat. Thanks, Lou.
Thanks a lot, Julie. And I think we're going to have some time at the end of this meeting and after the few presentations to discuss the implications and potential for all of us to contribute ideas, key messages, case studies through the USWG for everything that is directly connected to urban interventions. So yeah, happy to save some time at the end to discuss this in more detail. I think it's a really important list of key actions to be able to move forward. An additional topic that you covered during the Shelter and Settlement Roundtable was climate and environment, which is also becoming a clear priority for the sector, and that shelter and settlement actors have a strong role to play in. And so I'm really happy to invite Tatiana and Natalia from Impact Initiatives, who've been working over the last few months on developing a technical thematic annex to the original settlements approach guidance note to look specifically at how the approach can be a tool to integrate environmental consideration and develop settlement-based, environmental friendly and supportive programs using data as a core driving force. So Natalia and Tatiana, please, the floor is yours, and I can move your slides.
Yes, please. So we can go directly to the next slide. Me and Tiana, we've been co-leading the drafting of this addendum and try to integrate, first of all, kind of to analyze the whole guidance note, settlement approach guidance note, and understand in which sides of it the environmental considerations are the most applicable and useful. And of course, all four characteristics of the settlement approach, they have something to do with environment, right? Whether it's multi-stakeholder engagement where we involve environmental or climate subject matter experts to the context or needs analysis, or it's understanding how the environmental or climate shocks, they impact different population groups, among them the most vulnerable ones. Also, when it's come to high needs, we see the intersections where needs interlinks with environmental degradation, climate risks, and hazards. And also, when we talk about multi-sectorality, we understand that each humanitarian sector can be impacted or also can impact environment. The environmental thematic annex was built on four of these characteristics and key actions that are also included in the settlement approach guidance note. And it was built for the first two steps of the settlement approach, namely identifying, delineating target settlements, and the second stage, applying settlement approach to context and need analysis. The further two, like third and fourth steps, it's yet to come in the future. So today we'll present mostly those two steps and how we considered with extensive expert contribution the integration of environmental considerations in those two steps. You can go further. Yeah, and why it's needed. So basically, currently we see this momentum in environmental and climate change discussions at the global and national, local level, and we see that as a highly correlated topic with humanitarian assistance, with humanitarian needs. So we decided to make it happen, and that humanitarian needs, they are related. It's obvious, to environmental degradation, risk, natural resources, But the most important that we tried to understand and translate it into how all those could be seen as a global issue, could be transferred into the local actions, and how the solutions can be very context specific to mitigate and address those environmental issues. So the audience of the thematic annex is humanitarian practitioners, both aid agencies, local stakeholders that would like to mainstream environment in their settlement-based programs, or those who are already in this approach of addressing environmental concerns. They just need some localized lens and approach, which this thematic annex also could contribute to. And the next slide, please. So the outcome of the work are two documents. This is the guidance note, which basically referenced a lot the settlement approach guidance note. So basically, it's not like a standalone document, but it's a document that always refers how by applying the settlements approach, you can consider environmental lens or disaster lens or climate related lens. So the guidance answers mostly the questions why and how we can integrate those considerations in the settlements approach. And the second document is checklist, which provides concrete tools, resources that support operationalization of those key actions and key steps, which provided in the guidance note. Next, please. And Tatiana will follow up.
Thank you. So we'll continue with explaining the tools and guidance and a bit of process used to draft this document. So you could see on the screen we are referencing some of the document which includes IFRC participating mapping tool guidance, UN Habitat urban profile document, for example, but also links to resources and databases that might be used to get any information about the environment and hazard present or in close proximity to the settlement. And with this moment, I would actually like to pause here a bit for a moment and to use this moment for the expert group gathered together to ask if you could please message in the chat if you've been using any environmental screening tools in your operations, and if yes, then what was this tool you used? So if you would like to share in the chat, would be also interesting to know. And then integrating environmental consideration in settlement delineation aim to ensure that humanitarian response capture critical environmental and disaster factors that affect or may affect people, and also that local knowledge in particular about the shared resources or hazard-prone areas, land use and environmental regulations are taken into account. And considering that, and also understanding that administrative boundaries quite often would not reflect the surrounding environment or may not include the natural assets, agricultural livelihoods on the communities, the settlement, people living in the settlement relying on, and also might not include the areas of people's concern, as there might be, as you could see on the picture, landslide or flood-prone area outside of administrative boundary, but in close proximity to residential building. And those type of impacts may differ gradually from one area to another, depending on such factors as climate, vegetation, environmental condition, would be quite specific and very localized. And to achieve this better integration and consideration, we defined 4 key steps which should be considered, or in addition to already existing steps in the settlement approach. And also we defined key steps for each of the key actions. And first, Key action out of this four is to consider critical environmental and climate disaster criteria. Then to map a broader environmental context, reflect local perception, ensure flexibility. And then could we move to the next slide, please? And for each key action, so I'll showcase only one of the steps, which is to map a broad environmental context. This step in the document, we included the key actions, which should include the secondary data sources, field observation, visual natural resources, hazard-prone areas identification. And in the checklist, we link in the tools which might be useful and which I referenced on a previous slide. So actually we could probably move to another step. And as illustration, we reference the example showcased or described in the recent publication of interaction on effective humanitarian response, which requires collaborative environment and management. And this describes a Cox's Bazar site located in forest inhabited by Asian elephants and disrupted the elephant corridors, leading to human-wildlife conflict. And considering or knowing this information is quite important to capture the localized understanding of the area and situation. So because we could step to another slide and I'll
considering the time constraint, very briefly on the second step of the settlement approach, need assessment and context analysis. Likewise, we understand that within the one settlement, there could be different types of environmental threats, hazards, and impacts, both made by the natural environment or the humanitarian activities within the settlement. So we first three key actions of the guidance note is dedicated mostly to community threats, and they are related to understanding the context of environment and risk in the settlements, as well as how you integrate indicators and specific research questions to the needs and capacity assessment, which are relevant to environmental impact and risks. And one key action for it's related to how humanitarian interventions could positively or negatively impact the environment within the targeted settlement. And next slide, it just also showcase like that key action 2, for example, which related to needs and context analysis. It has its own key steps, which we translate later in the checklist with the specific tools and resources relevant for the settlement level that could be applicable and support the operationalization of this approach at the settlement level. And with this, that's it. If you want to sign up for the upcoming thematic annex, which we expect to publish very soon, please scan the QR code and you will get it first. Thank you.
And even if you don't scan the QR code, we'll find a way to make it widely available. It's going to be published on the Global Shelter Cluster's website. We're going to email this to people and hopefully have a bit of a reflection in a year's time to reflect on how that has been used and applied in the field. Thanks a lot, Natalia and Tetiana. I'm just going to save time for questions towards the end so we can take all questions and reflections also for the other presenters. And now we're moving on to a slightly different topic in application of the Salmon's approach, is how to implement the approach from within a large organization, and what are the implications for an organization like IOM to work together as a team internally with multiple teams to implement this approach in a few pilot countries. And many thanks to Laura Acup, who's going to tell us a bit more about the progresses made and challenges faced over the last 2 years within IOM. Thanks a lot.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Louise. Yeah, so I'm just going to give a quick update on, as Louise was saying, on how we're going about trying to operationalize or institutionalize settlement approach within IOM. So a little update on some of those steps that we're taking, and then also a few reflections on some of the sort of the benefits and challenges and wider questions around that. Do you want to move to the next slide? Thank you. Yeah, so in terms of steps towards operationalizing the process, I guess a couple of years ago, I started a process of trying to sort of take stock of different examples where IOM was already taking some form of settlement approach within different country programs. Examples where we weren't necessarily calling it settlement approach might have been under varying different names that all sort of similar but different. Could have been locations where we maybe taking an approach of taking some of the aspects of a settlement approach, but not necessarily sort of a full settlement approach, but trying to sort of essentially sort of take stock of where we're at as an organization and draw out some examples from that. And then linked to that and linked to the cluster guidance note, then we've started this process of developing an internal toolkit to support operationalizing and institutionalizing the use of the settlement approach within IOM. And so there's a few different components to that toolkit, but at the moment it sort of focuses mostly on the first three aspects, with the main focus being on how we go about doing settlement profiling and settlement action planning. And we've had some discussions internally also about how we could think of the types of locations where we might be going about doing sort of using a settlement approach as being categorized into three main categories. So one being locations where maybe we're starting new programming in a new place, so somewhere where we haven't worked before or where we're sort of just beginning to work, and so then we can sort of take in a settlement approach from the get-go, so it can be sort of part of the programming from the very beginning, part of the approach. So that would be slightly different to locations where we might already be working, we might have existing programming, might have some degree of joined up integrated programming happening, but then coming in and sort of taking a moment to take stock and think about how a settlement approach could support and build on the existing programming that's happening. Could be a sort of a second category of place where we're not doing starting off with a settlement approach from the get-go, but sort of trying to use it as an approach to stitch things together in a slightly better way a little later on in the process of working in a place. And then a third category being locations where perhaps there's a high level of need but very limited resources, and then so we were thinking, in locations like that, then could a sort of a light version of not a whole settlement approach, but maybe just focusing on settlement profiling, or a light version of settlement profiling, support with getting a better understanding of a place to then support advocacy and resource mobilization. So we're thinking about these sort of three different sort of categories of locations, and then linked to that, we've been piloting the toolkit through specific capacity support to a few different country missions, so to Nigeria, Libya, Ecuador, and Chad. Can you go to the next slide? And then so, a few sort of broad benefits of working on these pilots. So we've been trying to sort of approach it as being sort of using a settlement approach as a tool to support better integrated programming. So trying to sort of see it as a tool to achieve that better integration. And then also using it as a tool to better bring together different stakeholders. So obviously community members, different levels of government, different partner organizations, and then also internally within our own organization, sort of using it as a way to bring people together and develop a shared understanding, shared vision for a place. And then also another benefit that we've seen is it's sort of enabling slightly longer term thinking. At least, we have this challenge of short-term funding, obviously, but I think one of the benefits of taking a settlement approach and going through some of those profiling and action planning steps can at least be a sort of developing a vision for a slightly longer time period, and then obviously having to work that back into chunks of what funding, actually allows. But at least it enables sort of slightly longer term thought process rather than only thinking, 1 year or 2 years at a time. Having the spatial analysis that comes out from the settlement profiling has been really useful in informing programmatic decision making. Often we find if when in places where we're not necessarily taking a settlement approach, it's often the sort of the spatial side of things that's a bit lacking in terms of our understanding of how these different sort of layers can inform decision making. So that's has been a real benefit. And then also in terms of the pilots, we tried to select a real sort of diversity of pilots so that we could demonstrate that the settlement approach can be useful in all kinds of different contexts. So working in different places where there might be different objectives, different scales, different entry points, different contexts, also trying to work both in rural and urban context to show that while it's an approach that might be all the more useful in urban environments, can still be incredibly useful in rural environments. So really trying to sort of demonstrate that it can be useful in a whole variety of context. And then from that sort of then trying to see how we can sort of take steps towards normalizing it as an approach rather than having pilots, but thinking of it in terms of like sort of a normal way of working in country missions or trying to work towards that. Could you go to the next slide? So then just briefly a few sort of common challenges or areas for advocacy or wider questions. One of the challenges we find internally in IOM is we have quite a range of different internal organizational structures from one country to another. And so this means that in terms of, who might be leading the process, who are the focal points, who are the champions, can vary a lot from place to place. And so that just needs a bit of sort of understanding in terms of, different country missions. But then when it comes to capacity building and understanding, how we might approach going about doing the settlement approach in different countries, it might range quite a lot in terms of which teams and which units are driving it. So for example, it might be something that's overseen by someone who works in a durable solutions team, could be someone from shelter and settlements, could be, an emergency coordinator. So it could vary quite significantly from place to place. And then linked to that, sometimes we get, the question of, well, why is this an approach that's coming out of shelter and settlements? If we're talking about it being, truly cross-sectoral, then why is it coming through this one sector? And obviously there's good reasons why it has come out of shelter and settlements, but it's something that we discuss a fair bit internally sometimes and have to have that discussion with other sector colleagues, and that sort of links to that first point as well in terms of who does it best sit with in terms of how it's being led at country level. And then there's also some sort of confusion, overlap in terms where we'll often have these discussions around, is it settlement approach, is it area-based approach, is it neighbourhood approach? These are discussions that we seem to have over and over. So that's can be a challenge also. And then the next point, I mentioned this already a little bit in terms of, sometimes there can be a challenge around demonstrating how the approach can be relevant in a given context. So we're hoping that through having this range of pilots and case studies that will help to demonstrate that it can be useful across different contexts and with different ranges of funding levels. So we're trying to not just have examples where there's very, very nice, very in-depth examples, which are great to see, but I think they can also sometimes alienate teams where they look at an example and they think, well, that's very nice, but how could we ever possibly do that? So we're trying to sort of have a range of different contexts in all kinds of different ways. And then there's also sometimes a question that comes out in terms of like sort of data and analysis, like where who should the data belong to, how is it updated, how should it be shared? And obviously these are, this is always context specific depending on the place, but I think if there are going to be more and more of these approaches taken and more different organizations facilitating settlement profiles and action plans to be developed, then how do we how can is there a way to sort of better approach this in a more consistent way, or is it something that could be discussed sort of at the country level or within sectors or within area-based coordination? And then just lastly, a point around the need for flexible and longer-term funding, because obviously that would be beneficial. I'll leave it there. Sorry, I went a little over time.
No problem, Laura. That was really insightful. Thank you so much for sharing this on behalf of IOM. I mean, a lot of the points you're concluding on echo quite clearly the key actions that Julie covered in the beginning, that came out from the discussion at the Shelter and Settlement Roundtable around who owns this approach and who is best positioned to own it, and how to make sure that within an organization an effective collaboration can take place across sectors, and that everybody engaged feels a responsibility to contribute to that collective effort is one of the challenges that we keep hearing from agencies. It may be less applicable to smaller scale projects and agencies, but as long as you're talking of large organizations that work in silos, that's clearly going to be an important challenge to overcome. The fact that we need to demonstrate relevance, obviously internally, as well as externally, is also echoes to the points we discussed in the beginning. And I was wondering if there was a plan for IOM to put together these learnings in a public-facing form document, if you would be willing to contribute this in a more public-facing manner, or if that was more meant to be an internal learning content. And then we'll move to Sandra without further ado.
That's a good question. I'm honestly not sure, but I can check with colleagues and see how we could go about sort of sharing some of these learnings more broadly. I'll check back and come back to you on that one.
Thank you so much. Well, the fact that you're here is already a lot to contribute to IOM's learnings. So without further ado, we'll pass over to Sandra from IFRC. She will present IFRC's new rental assistance toolkit. So looking at the application of this approach from a slightly different and more thematic angle, mainly in urban areas, if I understood correctly. And maybe if I can just share a short disclaimer. The working group has spent a lot of time reflecting on the application of the Salmon's approach, and also reflecting on how it wasn't meant to be solely for urban areas, but also super relevant for sites and settlements in peri-urban settings and in rural settings. But with all of these discussions, we've sort of lost sight of the urban focus of the working group that initially formed, was very much the reason why we got together as a group. And we're willing to sort of refocus on the urban specificities and the urban dimensions of our work in future discussions, because there seems to remain gaps in knowledge, practice, concept, and understanding on urban practice and implications. Sandra, please, over to you, and I can move your slides as well.
Great, thank you. First, just maybe a sound check. Can you hear me properly? Yes, Louise. Well, thank you so much for getting us together today, Louise, and the many colleagues, Eva, Hilmi. And indeed, it feels like some time that we haven't exchanged, but it is also really heart welcoming that I also see that many of the challenges that are coming up are very similar. So the more we can do to learn from each other's approach and to make a meaningful breakthrough in the settlement approach. Today, indeed, I was asked to focus, as you just said, on a specific form of assistance that we feel is very appropriate to urban context. I'll just keep it short to a 5-7 minutes presentation, as you mentioned. So I'll drive you through some slides, but maybe just a bit of the rationale behind this, because typically This is also named sometimes, oh, it's just cash for rent, and we'll make a point. It is not just cash for rent. It is an approach that we feel combines many sectors together, from indeed people on the move. So it's displacement focus, it's a durable solution. It involves cash, but it also involves parameters around housing, safety, security, protection, and safety nets in general. We have been learning a lot around this approach in the last, notably 4 or 5 years, around some specific crises such as Venezuela. That was a bit of a pilot for us, and then the Caribbean. And then we moved to the next scale, as we have seen in Ukraine and neighboring countries, where we have applied the rental assistance methodology to the next level, because many more have been assisted with this tool. Next slide, please. I keep on zooming in and out, which is a bit funny. Okay, so I'd like to just walk you through what already exists, because sometimes I get this question, yes, Sandra, where do we find, where is it all combined together? So what does exist? I mean, we've been working since 2020 on a step-by-step guide for rental assistance to people affected by crisis. So it is available in the languages you see. This is really it's about 80 pages guide. So really comprehensive guidance on the key considerations in rental assistance programming as a response option, right? So it has 2 main parts. It defines a rental assistance program in different contexts, also describing its advantages and disadvantages compared to other approaches. And the second part of the guidance really walks you through each of the steps in a program, organized really around the humanitarian program cycle. Then on the Cash Hub, you would find a tip sheet for rental assistance programming, also declined in different languages. And this one is really also using many of the elements of cash and voucher assistance, but related to rental programming. And the third one that we do have available for all shelter partners is the introduction to rental assistance programming. This one here is really more recent, at least 2023. Last year, we have developed this 1-hour self-guided online course that you find on the IFRC learning platform. You just need to Google it. And this one here is really for any practitioner that wishes to be introduced to what does it entail. You just need to establish I would say maybe a 2-hour self-guided tool, and you really get the basics of it and the way that you could fit this approach into your programs. And then on the Global Shelter Cluster rental market page, there is a whole page. I had looked through that also when we were talking more around housing, land, and property rights. It has a range of resources collected from many, many programs in many different regions, and I invite you to look at that. Next slide, please. So as I said, the first part of this guide defines really what rental assistance program is. How is it coordinated with others? Where does it fit into a wider response? And this can really be in disaster, in conflict, in migration, during pandemic, or really to address issues such as homelessness as well, as part of the more social side of it that we're seeing as well. So really different scenarios, from temporary, transitional, or durable situations, durable solutions. The second part would take you through the typical program management cycle, including a bit of a step 0, which is really important because you need to prepare and give concise guidance as well on all the sub-steps and key actions required to undertake rental assistance programming. First of all, really, if it's also a go or no go, looking at your context, is it doing a market assessment and a number of things related to the scenario in which you want to roll out this program. And indeed, some of these documents really include hands-on examples of how we did it in, say, Slovakia, Poland, Venezuela, different countries. Next one, I would say, just give you through a sense of the whole of the project cycle here. As you see, the step 0 is really context analysis, preparing, and also advocacy, because some of the bottlenecks we may face as well is policy and us to be able to provide rental assistance in a given context. So preparing that, then of course the context analysis, which comes with the cash feasibility assessment, for instance, or insisting on rental housing market assessment. You really have to understand your demand and the market environment considerations as well before even starting. And of course, very important for us and close to our hearts is the security of tenure assessment. What are the ways of securing tenure? And this is something that probably with our shelter and settlements hats on, these legal considerations are really very important for others to understand that might consider, oh, well, that's too complex. We'll do just cash in hands and unconditioning it. Well, for us, this consideration is really important, alongside with things that have to do also with looking at the minimum considerations for the housing in terms of protection and safety. Then you design and plan your program, you implement and monitor, and this of course goes from all the way from rental agreement and payment considerations, looking at who are you paying, is it the house owners, is it the renters themselves, what kind of agreement, end of contract, and exit strategy, of course, which is really important to also consider flanking measures, such as providing maybe livelihood support along with maybe part of the rent at the end, and looking how people can cope once this program is then ending its time period. Next one. So the last two slides are really around components of the rental support. You really need to consider all of this together, because it is about, communication, empowering people, and advocacy around it. So information, but more than that, really getting a buy-in from different stakeholders. Minimum housing standards, absolutely. This one here is critical for us in the sector to look, what does that mean in a given urban context often? Is it a room? Is it a shared space? For how many? Is it properly ventilated? Does it have wash? I mean, the minimum considerations once, that you provide the assistance. This is not just, a couch on someone else's bedroom. You need to measure and you need to set those parameters before starting the program. Minimum security of tenure, touching base on that, the exit strategy, the technical advice that can come at specific moments from legal or from our technical teams, and then looking with, of course, more cash experts around the rental payments, the service, financial service providers, how does that work? And those considerations with complementary programs, usually in terms of giving people more of an assistance also around accessing maybe social security, with sharing lists of the most vulnerable people, or giving support in terms of livelihoods. Next one. Again, here I really want to stress the fact that this is not cash for rent. It is really putting together essential elements of rental assistance, all the way from security to housing standards and to cash. And lastly, the rental assistance toolkit, what we now have as the newest part of this toolbox, we call it. We really felt that our teams itself, it's not enough to provide a guidance. We really needed something more in terms of standard operating procedures that we could work with, and tools and examples that give really hands-on tips and checklists of how to do it. So you see here, this is really a screenshot. It's too small to read, don't read it, but you will see it really includes links to the tools, examples related to the process. So this one is around targeting and selection, for instance, but for each topic you would find a range of, do it this way, and the standard procedure that can be applied for people looking at this as in the program. We will be holding everything on the Cash Hub website. I think that's a common place, apart from the aforementioned IFRC learning platform, which, by the way, just needs you to subscribe, but you don't have to be Red Cross affiliated nor a volunteer. You can just access it for different learnings. Next one. And yes, here as an example of an item of this toolkit, this one relates to a program in Slovakia. Specifically, maybe some of the colleagues online may have worked in Poland or Slovakia. So here, the housing adequacy also includes the security of tenure support. As you can see here, it goes from how do you do registration, how you look at eligibility status, then you go down the line with the housing adequacy, what kind of method of assessment do you use, if it's COBO, do your verification and checklist. There are a set of parameters that come with this kind of flow of activity. Impacts here, we really look at impacts which have to do with durable solutions, which have to do as well with arrangements, sometimes with hosting arrangements. This is slightly different than rental assistance, but it adopts some of the main principles as well of people helping each other with or without, of course, the cash flow between. But it also looks at creating between, for instance, host and hosted communities, social measures that enable then more of cohesion and pathways for stronger local economies as well. So I think here, I mean, we cannot stress enough that we're learning our route through those operations, but we really would like to offer this training as well to others other than the 1 hour online, and see if we can hold hands with other organizations in promoting this approach. Over to you, Louise, and of course, any questions, but my time is up.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for introducing this. I mean, we rarely have a chance to zoom in these toolkits that can be seen as quite technical if you're not an expert, and it's really good to see that it's up there and available for the larger community. Also, in a moment where there's a lot of talk about the responsibility and contribution of humanitarian organizations for durable solutions, especially in how to contribute to this in urban areas, and being able to support effective rental solutions for IDPs is actually one key way of contributing to this. So yeah, thanks a lot for sharing this this within the community. And we may get back to you for specific HLP related questions, which is also often overlooked in multi-sectoral responses.
Absolutely.
I'm just looking at the time, and we were meant to have Aminar from SRH Pakistan present a case study on green reconstruction, but he was actually not able to come because he's on a flight. And Alexandra from SDC has just joined us. Alexandra, if you're still there, I could see you on... Yes, you're there. Yes. Feel free to introduce yourself to the group, to the members of the Urban Summits Working Group, because it's your first time joining. You didn't miss much last year because we hadn't really had a chance to have regular meetings for some time. But if you can tell us who you are and what you'd be interested in learning from us and contributing to the group, that'd be helpful. And thanks for joining.
Thank you, Louise, and sorry for being late for my first meeting. Unfortunately, I need really to leave at 4, so I have like 2 minutes left. So maybe I can tell you more about my work and what is SCC doing in terms of...
Alexandra, you're breaking up quite a bit for me. Others, do you also have the same problem in hearing you?
Yes, we can hear her.
How about you remove your headphones? Maybe if you speak directly. Yeah, you can just try.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me now? Hello.
We can hear you, but it's breaking up a little bit.
Wait, just 1 second, sorry.
There's some background noise. I think there's
Yeah,
a
there's
second speaker on.
I think she's just disconnected and is about to move back in. So we'll just give her a second. And I apologize, but it would have been a bit difficult to cut any of the people who presented today. That also means there is not so much time for the discussion, but we were planning to convene another meeting dedicated to advocacy areas in September. So this time is definitely not lost. As we wait for Alexandra to come back in, Eva, do you want to introduce the topic of learning and advocacy and case study collection, perhaps, before everybody has to move on to?
Yes, great, Luis. Just like quickly, no? And well, it's great that obviously we are here, no? Because all of us were interested in like urban context and settlement approach. So like the urban settlement working group, we are also thinking what's next, no? So we are planning or starting to brainstorm, no? To organize a webinar by the end of September to reflect and explore together various modalities, no? For working in urban environments, obviously settlement approach, but also the modalities. And we are doing this exercise internally in CRS. We are mapping our interventions in urban context. IOM also shared today, no? Like their work on settlement approach, no? And the challenges that they are also like facing and somehow also documenting. So we are also looking like or seeking no contributors to enrich this discussion that we plan to have in September. Feel free to reach out to us. I will drop also my email in the chat. And yeah, open to different topics for discussion and also like contributors, active contributors for this webinar. It would be, we will try to probably have a different format, no, to maybe some short presentations, but just to kick off discussion, no, and also to challenge somehow what we are doing. Thanks a lot. And now I don't know if it's over to Hilmi
Alexandra?
or Alexandra, perhaps.
Let's just try and get Alexandra back in for a minute of introduction, if she manages
Can you hear?
to.
Hello, hello.
Yes, we can hear you. We can't see you. We can see your roof, but we can hear
Sorry, I
you.
don't know what's wrong. I'm in the office, huh?
No problem.
So just very quickly, because unfortunately I really need to leave in a minute. But I'm more than happy, like to tell you a bit more during the next meeting about my thematic files and what STC is doing basically around urban settlement or urban response and build back better. So my name is Alexandra Keppeler and I work for STC at STC HQ for humanitarian operations, and I have basically the thematic lead on environmental sustainability in humanitarian aid and build back better. And at the same time, I have like a second hat. I'm the deputy head of the expert group construction of the Swiss humanitarian aid unit. Maybe for the ones who don't know it, Switzerland also has like an expert roster, like of experts which can be deployed for our own operations, but then also be seconded to partners and so on. And the expert group construction is basically working around shelter and settlements. And we have also experts in Build Back Better and settlement response, urban settlement response. And again, like I'm more than happy to tell you a bit more about this, about our approach, about our concept. But really, unfortunately, I really need to run. Sorry, but I'm super happy to be part of this urban settlement group with you. I'm looking forward to further discussions. Bye bye.
Bye, Alexandra. Thanks for joining and looking forward to have you join for the next rounds. Okay. It's already 2 past, so I'm just going to hand over to Hilmi for the concluding remarks and let everybody get back to business, I suppose.
Thank you, everybody. Sorry we run out of time, but please continue to engage in the working group. I put a link on there. If you do have time, try and take these 5 questions. It should take only about 5 minutes, a little bit, maybe 7 minutes. this is where you can have your say and your challenges and barriers and lessons. And if, as Eva said, if you have case studies, we would like to hear, even if it is not written up, one-on-one, we can talk. Thank you so much for your time, and look forward to continue this discussion.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.